One for the road. Chapter 2. Shit, oh no, please no. Abject horror struck him the moment he had finished squeezing through the hole someone long before him had cut in the chain link. He looked over the small, verdant, man-made valley that rested within the tangles of interchanges between the 5 and 10 freeways. He saw the telltale white trucks before he completely processed the terrain, their orange bubble lights flashing the words, "Say goodbye to your shit," in Morse code. Maybe he wasn't too late, and if he were that lucky, maybe they would let him break down his camp and keep his things. He hesitated at the opening in the chain link fence, kicking the idea around in his mind for the moment. His only real concern was the ever-present factor in much of his decision-making, the Orbisons. These were just sanitation workers, though, tasked with cleaning up messes, and his home was just one of those messes. There would be a cop nearby, likely sitting in his car, in case anybody gets overly defensive of their stuff, but he doubted very much that the workers would clue into the fact that he was underage, for he was on that cusp of adulthood that made it hard for the less observant to tell, or if they did, would they even care? As he approached, what little amount of hope he had mustered was dashed as he passed the flat, empty spot which had been his campsite. Nothing remained, except the small patch of strawberries he had bought, rescued, really, at the grocery store, and planted in an area that could leach water from the nearby sprinklers. No one passing this place would have ever known he had been there, had spent his evenings reading books or watching YouTube videos here, known of his days sorting out and working on his salvage, how he had cooked nearly all his meals, pathetic as they were, on the Coleman camping stove he had laboriously saved up for, how he had checked every morning for ripe strawberries on the plant, which had now, thanks to its runners, multiplied into a humble but productive patch, how he had relished their sweetness and warmth, and felt as though he had something. Now it was gone, like his father, his mother, even the fucking car. It was gone. There was at least one saving grace, if all else failed. He had been wise enough to keep his savings, totaling in nearly $1,000 now, in a small floor safe that he kept buried and covered in twigs and dead leaves. It was doubtful that these workers would have uncovered it. He proceeded toward the sanitation truck, erring on the side of caution, and decided to wait until they were out of sight to dig up his stash. They weren't likely to try to rob him, but you never could be too careful. The workers were systematically taking apart the camp of one of Ben's few neighbors. His name was Jimmy. They hadn't been particularly close, but they had been friendly enough to occasionally share their dinner with each other if they had extra. The living space had been built with Jimmy's own hands out of pallets and scrap wood. It was lying in shambles now. It almost looked like the big bad wolf had come by and just blown it right down. "Hey, I'm gonna need you to back up, kid," one of the workers, maybe the supervisor, called to him as he approached. "Where do you take all this stuff?" he blurted. The worker, a tall Latino man with tattoos covering his arms, looked him up and down, assessing him, determining if Ben was homeless or just a nosy kid before he spoke. "All the trash goes to the dump. The rest goes to a warehouse over in Skid Row. You can pick your stuff up there." "And what if it isn't all there?" he asked, wondering how much trash never made it to the dump. The worker bristled at this. "Look, kid, I make my own money. I don't steal shit no more. Especially not from a tent by the freeway. Anything that isn't clearly trash goes to the storage facility. I'll give you a card with the address on it." "How are they supposed to know whose is whose?" "We write down as many details about the camp we find the stuff at. They'll ask you to describe your shit, and if everything is copacetic, you get access. You even get to store larger objects there for free if you want," he explained as he handed Ben the card. Ben knew he had likely botched his chances of getting any sympathy now, but he was pissed. Anyone would be in this situation. And watching these men laugh and shoot the shit while disassembling people's lives, his life, infuriated him. He understood it was just a job to them and there was no real malice, but he just couldn't help it. "Listen, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to accuse you of anything. You've almost everything I own on your truck now. And knowing you guys handle my things, sorted through it, I guess I just got a little defensive. The band took a breath and looked Ben up and down once again, this time with a look that may have been sympathy, and spoke with a sigh. As someone who had his fair share of people riding through his shit against his will, I understand, kid. Thank you for the apology. Is there any way I could just grab a few of my things before you take it away? He thought about trying to sound younger than he was, emphasize his helplessness, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. I don't think so, kid. I could lose my job. Nothing's supposed to come out the truck once it's loaded. Make sure things don't go missing. The worker shot Ben a look as if to remind him of his accusations. It made him flush. He felt his face getting hot. He wished he had mustered up more tact before speaking. Please? Look, I'll describe my stuff and you can confirm it with your description. Just like the storage facility will. I don't need much, just like a few little things. It'll all fit inside my backpack. The worker looked back at the truck, then at his colleagues now sorting through Jimmy's possessions, then back to Ben, clearly turning the idea over in his head as he did so. Fine, but make it quick. We're already on overtime. You put everything back nice and neat, and don't make me regret this by grabbing anything illegal. I'll have to call an officer over. His face said he really didn't want to have to do that, either out of disdain for the police or pity for him. Ben didn't know, and it didn't matter. Thank you. And no, just my toothbrush and some snacks, things like that. He described his camp to the supervisor, who found 2 containers with small description tags on them that matched Ben's. He gathered up his toiletries, a jug of water, a handful of granola bars, a portable power bank to charge his phone, and a few other necessities small enough to fit in his backpack. Once the rest of his belongings were once again squared away in their containers, he slung his bag, which was considerably heavy now, over his shoulder and thanked the supervisor once again. It was another 30 minutes or so before the sanitation crew had finished packing away Jimmy's things and moved on down the access road out of sight. He crossed the street away from the bus stop he had been watching from and went back through the hole in the fence. For a moment he feared he wouldn't be able to find where he had buried his safe. The strawberry patch was a good landmark for his former home, but without the rest of his things present, it was a bit disorienting. Finally, he found it, unlocked it with the key that hung on a string around his neck, and allowed himself to be grateful for this blessing. It may be small to some, but he struggled to see how. It might be possible to get his belongings back after all. The place would almost certainly be closed by the time he got back to the row, but he could go first thing in the morning. Something told him that the attendant at the storage facility would not be unlike the sanitation workers, in that they see too much and are paid too little to be overly concerned with the welfare of one homeless teenager. Either way, he felt he had to go. Replacing the few comforts he had accumulated over these months would rapidly deplete his savings, and some he had only obtained through sheer luck, good finds while dumpster diving or things that people left out on the curb for free. If they threatened to call the cops or CPS, he would just have to bolt out of there, run like his life depended on it, and maybe come back another day hoping for less of a good Samaritan to be on the clock. Before any of that, though, he needed to find a place to sleep for the night. A bus stop or park bench was completely out of the question. What with his entire life savings and the remainder of his worldly possessions on him. He had a small buck knife to protect himself, but he'd rather not have to use it if possible. This only left one of the flop houses near the row as an option. He and his mother had stayed in them from time to time, and he wasn't at all looking forward to that again. They were generally filthy places and wrought with a terrible sense of danger and sadness. People often died in them, mostly of overdoses or suicide, but occasionally murder. It was as if all the suffering, all the desperation and woe and rage soaked into the walls of those rooms, and you could feel it emanating out of them, almost like heat from the asphalt in the summertime. But they were cheap, they took cash, and their clientele were almost exclusively the homeless. He left the cart behind this time as he began to make his way back toward downtown, unable to afford how much it would slow him down. The sun was already falling fast behind the monolithic skyline that rose out of the center of the basin, casting shades of orange, red, and purple across the sky like an impressionist painting. You did not want to find yourself walking around Skid Row at night. That was when the real freaks came out, and the later it got, the freakier they got. He gripped the handle of the knife in its sheath at his hip, assuring himself it was still there.